Welcome to Trashmagination, a podcast about reimagining trash. I'm Carla Brown. Today's episode is about what is commonly called styrofoam, or more accurately called polystyrene foam. Before social distancing, there was a growing movement to bring your own containers to restaurants, but now many restaurants will not put food in people's personal containers for health and safety reasons. So it's a sad time for many people who want to reduce their takeout food waste. Today, we'll talk about what options exist for avoiding polystyrene. We'll also talk about efforts to recycle it. And of course, I'll share stories about artists who make artwork from polystyrene. And then the last thing we'll talk about are creative reuse ideas that you can do at home. But first, what is polystyrene foam? There are two types, extruded and expanded. The most common extruded type is Styrofoam with a capital S, which is a brand name for a type of polystyrene foam made by Dow Chemicals. Now, you might have seen these blue sheets that go up in the walls of insulation in buildings. The type of polystyrene foam that you probably encounter more often is called expanded polystyrene foam, and that's what is used in to-go containers and meat trays. And other materials made from expanded polystyrene foam are egg cartons, packing peanuts, coolers, bodyboards, crown molding, and fishing equipment such as buoys and floats. And all of this type of plastic is type 6. There are many reasons why polystyrene foam is popular across many industries. It has great insulating properties, it is lightweight, it floats, it's inexpensive, it's waterproof, and it can hold hot food so you don't burn your hands. However, this material has a lot of problems. It is made from petroleum, and it releases carcinogens when heated. It gets blown by the wind all over the place. And when it breaks down, it becomes little tiny pieces of polystyrene, which are a huge pain to clean up and which are eaten by wildlife. And recycling programs are not cost-effective for this material. Some places have banned polystyrene to-go containers, such as Maine, Maryland, New York, and Washington, D.C., as well as many cities. Where I live in Virginia, there is a bill before the state legislature called the House Bill 533, which would ban these containers, but it is currently stalled. If you are ordering food to go and you want to avoid polystyrene or other plastic packaging, chances are good that you can't do it during social distancing. So for now, I recommend that you patronize restaurants that use more recyclable packaging, or you ask your favorite restaurants to switch to better packaging. Asking to have food put in your own container, even when it's not COVID-19 time, is daunting for many people. So I was excited to hear about a program in Durham, North Carolina called Green to Go, which started in 2017. I heard about this program on the podcast Locals Share Green Action. The interview was with Crystal Dreisbach, who started the Green to Go program. The way the program works is that restaurants sign up to have these special green to-go containers on hand, and then customers subscribe to the program. And when they order at the restaurant, they say, "I'm a green to-go customer," and the restaurant will put the food in these durable plastic containers. The subscriber can return the container to any participating restaurant. The Green to Go program then picks up the empty containers and cleans them in a commercial dishwasher. They then supply the clean containers back to the restaurants. Each plastic container can be used hundreds, if not thousands, of times. This system originated on university campuses, but Durham is the first city to implement the program. To be a customer, the program costs $25 per year or $3 a month, and that gives you one box at a time, although you can purchase a larger subscription for multiple boxes. And if you lose the box, it costs just $5. Now, I would gladly pay that fee to avoid creating trash when I order takeout from my local restaurants. Another thing I like about Crystal's interview is that she says there are many organizations that focus on reducing littering and they want to encourage recycling, but fewer focus on not making trash in the first place. And that is an excellent point. Even this podcast focuses more on using trash after it is already made. While it is great that governments are banning polystyrene to-go containers, it is not a trend to ban polystyrene meat trays or egg cartons. Bea Johnson, in her book Zero Waste Home, gives lots of advice on how to bring your own container to the grocery store and to ask the butcher or deli clerk to put the item in your container. And when she published her book in 2013, most stores probably had never been asked for this service. And so there were many stories where shoppers were told that no, that they would not put the item in their personal containers due to health regulations. However, in the time since then, so many people have asked for this service that many stores will now put your meat or cheese in your own container, at least not during the time of COVID-19. Other ways that people avoid polystyrene is by creating alternatives that work just as well. In terms of packing pellets, whenever I have received polystyrene pellets in a package, I bring them to a shipping store and they were happy to take them for reuse. But luckily, these types of pellets are becoming less common and are being replaced by innovatively folded cardboard shaped into cells to provide cushioning or plastic bags filled with air. And while neither of those are great environmental options either, they are better than polystyrene because they are accepted by many municipal recycling programs. I have seen packing pellets also made from corn. So if you want to see if your pellets are made from corn, just get one wet. And if it starts to dissolve, it is made from corn. I once saw a fun activity at a maker fair where people were taking these corn packing pellets and making them into sculptures by making them wet and sticking them together. In terms of the thick blocks of polystyrene used in electronics and other fragile packages, a company called Mycobond has developed an alternative made from growing mushrooms. And you can learn about that in a TED Talk by Eben Bayer, who invented this material. So now let's talk about recycling polystyrene. You know from listening to this podcast that I define recycling as centrally collecting the material in a community with the goal of remaking it for reuse, as compared to creative reuse, which means making it into something new, hopefully at home or in your business or at your school. Recycling is always going to use more resources than creative reuse because it requires collecting and transporting the material. In general, most municipal recycling programs do not recycle polystyrene. It's like the glitter of plastic recycling. It breaks down into those little static clingy balls and it sticks to everything else, contaminating the waste stream. It's dangerous to put it in your recycling bin because the wind will blow it out. And even if it could be collected easily and safely, it is not cost effective. This material is so light because it is mostly made of air. So when a truck carries a truckload for recycling, more than 90% of that truck is just filled with air, which is very expensive air. One way to reduce the cost of shipping polystyrene is to first treat it with a solvent that makes it collapse into a goo and release the air. And one of these solvents is called limonene, and it's made from orange peels. But as you can imagine, that's quite a process, and most municipal recycling centers don't have programs for this. There is a website called Home for Foam with a map that shows places in the United States where you can bring polystyrene for recycling. Unfortunately, there are none anywhere near me, but hopefully some near you. If you get polystyrene coolers mailed to your home filled with medical supplies, there are some companies that will take these coolers back and reuse them. I wish all companies that shipped their products in coolers would take them back and reuse them, especially medical suppliers and also those meat subscription companies. If you get those products and those companies don't take the coolers back, this would be a great opportunity for advocacy or switching companies. I visited one place that accepted large polystyrene blocks like that from electronics packaging or from construction sites. In Boulder, Colorado, the organization EcoCycle has a place called CHARM, or the Center for Hard to Recycle Materials. They do not collect food-grade polystyrene, such as to-go containers or meat trays. I saw how they would bale up the polystyrene to make it easier to transport and ensure it doesn't blow away. And they would take that polystyrene to a recycler who made CD cases, light switches, and cover plates. They also bring rigid foam insulation to the construction industry where it is used to make new building foundations. So that's how polystyrene is normally recycled. And as you can tell, there are lots of problems with these options. Now, there are also have been some very creative examples in the news for how polystyrene could be broken down. And these are not widespread, but they're fun stories, so I'll share them with you. In December 2016, Ashton Kofer gave a TED Talk called A Plan to Recycle the Unrecyclable, which has been viewed almost 1.5 million times. Ashton told a story about a science fair project he did with other students for the Lego robotics competition. In addition to their robotics project, they also worked on a science project, which was to see if they could turn polystyrene into active carbon, which is used in water filters. According to his TED Talk, polystyrene fills 25 to 30% of landfills, and in the United States, we produce 2 billion pounds of it every year. Ashton's team tried many methods of heating the polystyrene, but repeatedly it just exploded in a sticky mess. And in the end, they were successful and they won many awards. However, I cannot find any information about what his team has done with their findings since that 2016 TED Talk. The next idea for breaking down polystyrene involves beetle larvae, which eat the polystyrene and transform it into organic material. The larvae were able to survive even when their only food was polystyrene. Scientists found that bacteria in the gut of the larvae broke down the polystyrene into carbon dioxide. And now they would like to grow the bacteria outside the larvae to break down the polystyrene. But again, this is not a widespread offering yet. Next, I'm going to share stories about organizations who are making products from recycled polystyrene. The first story is about surfboards made by Sustainable Surf through a program called Waste to Waves. At surf shops along the California coast, they collect the big, chunky white polystyrene that you find in boxes when you buy computers or big screen TVs. They bring the polystyrene to a workshop of a company called Marco Foam. And there they have a machine called a densifier, which is about the size of a refrigerator. At the top of the machine is a grinder which breaks down the foam into small pieces. Then it goes into a part called a hot pot, which melts down the polystyrene into a goo. And then the goo is output into blocks, which they transport to their raw materials supplier, who remakes the polystyrene into normal surfboard shapes like what is they normally get from that supplier. The people working on this material say it has the same quality as polystyrene that has not been recycled. So rather than being an industry that makes something that can't be recycled, they now become a company that removes polystyrene from the waste stream. And surfers who get so much enjoyment from nature can now purchase a surfboard that doesn't harm nature. And you can see a great video showing the whole process on their website. I also searched for bodyboards made from recycled polystyrene, and I did find a company in France called Pride Bodyboards that has a line of bodyboards made from a minimum of 65% recycled polystyrene. Now we'll switch gears from products made from recycled polystyrene to artists who upcycle it. Of course, many artists make work from brand new polystyrene foam. It's like clay in that it can be sculpted into just about any shape. And so it is very useful, especially in movie making for props and all sorts of fun sculpture. But this show is about creative reuse of trash and not using new materials, so I'm not going to highlight those artists. I'm going to tell you about artists who work with polystyrene that they have diverted from landfill. The first artist is Joyce Majiski. My friend Johanna told me about Joyce's current project, which is building a whale skeleton from salvaged polystyrene. Joyce's project highlights a big problem caused by polystyrene buoys, which often break down in the ocean or get ripped off their anchors and become marine debris. When I searched for green alternatives to polystyrene buoys, pontoons, or floats, I found there was not much available. In addition, many fishermen use hundreds of polystyrene coolers called fish boxes to hold the fish that they catch for transport, and many of those degrade over time and also become trash. Oyster farms and aquaculture rely on polystyrene buoys and are a big source of marine debris. I read a report by an organization called Fauna and Flora International, which studied this problem, and some of their recommendations were for aquaculture installations to pull up their buoys and gear when they know there's going to be a big storm like a hurricane. They also recommended that we test alternatives to polystyrene fish boxes and that we test stronger protective coverings on buoys and pontoons so it takes longer for it to break down. And they also thought it would be important to set up disposal and recycling facilities for polystyrene at ports and harbors to make it easier for fishermen to recycle their polystyrene. So back to Joyce Majiski. Her project is called Song of the Whale, and she started carving in September 2019 and she finished in May 2020. You can look through her Instagram to see many awesome process photos of her sketching the real whale bones and then carving a replica of each bone from polystyrene. The model was a 25-foot-long juvenile female whale who died after being caught in fishing gear. Joyce borrowed the bones from the Beatty Biodiversity Museum located on Salt Spring Island in British Columbia. As she carved the bones, she learned that polystyrene is quite a diverse material and that some was much easier to carve than others and some is much stronger than others. The plan is to exhibit the whale where she lives in the Yukon Territory in December 2020. The next artist who works with polystyrene is Eveline Kolijn. She carves polystyrene with very intricate designs so they look like lace, and she calls them sublime waste. She carved to-go containers, which are sometimes called clamshell containers, as well as larger cubes and panels made of thicker slabs of polystyrene. She grew up in the Caribbean where she saw how trash was damaging for the fragile coral reefs, and she connects the clamshell to-go containers with clams in the ocean. But while real clams filter out toxins, clamshell containers are toxic. I think it's interesting that both Joyce and Eveline are interested in the connections between art and science, and that they were both drawn to polystyrene as a material as they explored those connections. They both have a deep knowledge in natural history and wildlife. They're both Canadian, and polystyrene is such an unnatural material, so I suppose it attracts them because it is so antithetical to the nature that they are trying to protect. Next, I want to tell you about the artist Ang Lee, who I encountered when I was researching my episode about artist residencies at landfills. Ang was doing a residency in the RARE program, which means Recycled Artist in Residency, located in Philadelphia. She put together a few exhibits based on that residency, including one called All That Is Solid, which was shown on the Chicago Pedway, which is a series of underground tunnels and overhead bridges that allows pedestrians to walk more than 40 blocks around Chicago indoors in the winter. So the way she made her exhibit is she made 9 bales that were each 8 feet tall by taking polystyrene foam, all little bits of it. And they didn't have that special polystyrene baler that I mentioned earlier in the episode, so she made a rudimentary baler by building a big box and lining it with plastic, then putting in all the various types of polystyrene that she was collecting at the landfill, and then she effectively shrink-wrapped it into a bale. The components of these bales were all different shapes, so they had lots of interesting design to them. And she put wheels on the bales so they could be moved around to configure the space in the gallery. And even though the bales were very large, they only weighed about 15 pounds each. In a lecture about this project, Ang notes that recyclables are valued based on their weight normally, and thus this is part of the reason why polystyrene is not valued in the recycling industry. When Ang is not working with polystyrene, she's an architect and assistant professor at the School of Architecture at Northeastern University. She's very interested in the environmental impacts of the building industry. Most of the time when I look at polystyrene, I feel quite sad. However, it's hard not to find humor in the work by Michael Salter, who makes giant robots called Styrobots. He builds these in galleries all over the world, and he makes them from the same materials that I mentioned before, the big bulky packaging from inside electronics or other fragile packaging. When you look at these forms, they are reminiscent of robot components in that they have a lot of nooks and crannies that look very purposeful and mechanical. His styrobots are intimidating because they are so big, like 2 stories high, but they are also humorous because they are so chunky. Michael was inspired to make styrobots by the 1931 version of the film Frankenstein. He writes, "I can't think of a better comment on the devastating American addiction of buying things than a giant beast made from the evidence of that act of buying. And yet, these beasts are not scary or threatening, but they are docile, fatigued, resigned, or misunderstood." To finish this week's episode, I'm going to share some project ideas that you can do at home to creatively reuse polystyrene. Let's start with polystyrene coolers, like the ones that come with meat subscriptions. Many people use these to make shelters for feral cats, and the way they do it is they cut a door in the cooler and then they line it with hay, and this helps those cats survive the winter. Another project you can make is a footstool or ottoman. And then some people carve polystyrene coolers to make gravestones for Halloween decorations. So the way these tutorials are listed on the website, usually they're talking about buying a new sheet of polystyrene, but you could totally use a slab from a cooler instead. Or you could get a sheet from a construction site that was tossing it. The way they make very detailed gravestones was to trace a pattern and then draw on the polystyrene using a soldering iron. And then they make something called monster mud, which is a mixture of drywall, compound, and water-based paint to paint over the foam so it looks like stone. The next project idea is for polystyrene trays. Of course, it is very important to clean them extremely well before using them for crafts. These can be used to teach a lot of basic printmaking skills. You can carve an image in the tray and then you can color over it with washable markers or paint and then make a print. And you can also cut the trays into shapes and glue them to wine corks to use them as stamps. The most ambitious home recycling project that I saw for polystyrene was by Kea Lea. She wanted to see if polystyrene waste could be used as insulation in a wall. She built a frame from wood and then she filled in the gaps with polystyrene that she collected. It was quite challenging because a lot of the polystyrene was small, like to-go containers, and she had to find a way to make it fit together. But in the end, she did find it worked as an insulator, and many people who commented on her project said that they found the same result. Thank you for listening. If you have made something cool from polystyrene or you have seen art made from recycled polystyrene, please let me know at trashmagination@gmail.com. Also, thank you to my friend Angela DeBurger, who interviewed me on her new podcast called The Creative Pulse. It was so fun talking about why I love researching creative reuse. Be sure to subscribe to both of our podcasts. Until next time, may you see trash as a source of art in your life.